Ladies and gents, welcome to our latest Future Seminar. My name is Najma Bakic. I'm Education Team Member within Bosnia-Herzegovina Futures Foundation. I'm truly honored tonight to host our speaker, Christoph Roser. Christoph Roser is a professor of production management at the Karlsruhe University of Applied Sciences. He writes based on decades of experience in implementing, researching, and teaching lean manufacturing, including 5 years working at and researching for Toyota in Japan. Throughout his career, Christoph Roser has worked in numerous different industry fields, including but not limited to automotive, machine building, robotics industry, injection molding, semiconductor, white goods, power tools, heating technology, security systems, energy, paper and pulp, food industry, foundry, and logistics services. Overall, he supported projects in almost 200 different plants in a multitude of industries. He blogs about his experiences and research on allaboutlean.com and published his book, Faster, Better, Cheaper, on the history of manufacturing. In 2017-2018, he toured Japan for 6 months, visiting plants of all 7 major Japanese automotive companies, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Suzuki, and Subaru. In this webinar, he will show you the strengths and weaknesses of the different Japanese car makers. He will quantitatively compare their efficiency. He will also give you a view into the Japanese working culture and their quest for perfection, in an attempt to demystify and explain the performance of the Japanese automotive industry. Dear Christoph Roser, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about what I've seen and experienced in Japan. And throughout my presentation, I will always have some small pictures from Japan, which I took myself. That's a temple in Kyoto, the old capital. But before I talk about Japan, a little bit about me. Name is Chris Roser, and I studied in Germany and America, and then worked for 5 years at Toyota in Japan. And at that time, I learned about the Toyota production system and lean manufacturing. After that, I spent a couple of years at McKinsey consulting company, also consulting all over the world in manufacturing optimization, and a few years at Bosch, including some time as a manager in the planning of heating boilers. And since 10 years now, I'm a professor at the Karlsruhe University of Applied Sciences. I do like writing, and I've written a couple of books. One was already mentioned, the history book, Faster, Better, Cheaper. Just recently, I won an award for my book on pull production, Kanban and others. And maybe some of you know me through my blog, allaboutlean.com, where I try to explain lean manufacturing in easy to understand terms. Yeah. But today we talk about Japan. And I spent a few years ago, I spent another half a year in Japan, and I managed to visit at least one plant of all 7 major Japanese car makers. In terms of size, it's Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Subaru, and Suzuki. And I'm sure you know pretty much all of them. And on the map, you see all the different plants I've been visiting, a lot of them from Toyota, including some Lexus plants, a few plants with Honda and Mitsubishi, and many more. And I'm going to look at a little bit more detail in not all of those companies, but some of them. We only have like 45 minutes, but I'm going to look in more detail in some of them. But before that, one overview slide. Basically, I tried to measure how efficient is each plant. And by efficiency, I mean what percentage of the time is value add? What percentage of the time does the worker actually create value for the part, meaning actually assembling the part, not walking around, not waiting, not transporting, not searching, not talking with somebody else. What percentage of the time are the workers actually assembling part? And I was expecting that Toyota would be the best, because the Toyota production system is legendary, it is famous, and Toyota was indeed very good. But what surprised me was that Nissan was even a tad better. Here is the percentage value add for the different plants, actually the different lines within one plan. For example, the best one was the Toyota Tsutsumi plant final assembly line, Takoka engine plant, axle plant, we have a door line, so different lines. And what I found interesting was that Nissan was in average even a little bit better than Toyota. Toyota had like 65% value add. Nissan in average was a bit better with 70% value add. So that's very surprising. And of course, the best plant was the final assembly line of the Tsutsumi plant, which had almost 80% value adding time. And that's amazing. Because if you look at the other plants, Mazda was okay, Suzuki also, but Subaru, Mitsubishi, and Honda all somewhere around 45 to 50% value adding time. And now, if you're a plant manager, it's easy to see if at Subaru, and you need twice as many people to do the same work than at Toyota Tsutsumi. So that's a very interesting result. And of course, it doesn't happen automatically. It's a lot of work from Toyota and Nissan put in there to make sure everything works smooth, everything works seamless. And if you actually watch those assembly lines, it's just beautiful to watch how well integrated their manufacturing and their assembly is. So that's for an introduction. Now let's have a look at some different car makers. But first, again, small picture from Japan, the famous Golden Temple in Kyoto. That's the picture you always see. In reality, it looks something like this, so a little bit more crowded, but still a fun place to visit. So, Toyota, famous for the Toyota production system, which is the example for lean manufacturing. And I'm a big fan of Toyota. And one of the strengths of Toyota is, or maybe was, that people on all levels of hierarchy are heard. Meaning even the person at the very bottom assembling cars, if he has some doubts or some concerns, the leadership will listen to him. And in many cases, they can even convince leadership if something needs to be changed. And if, for example, if the plan of leadership is not good, people at the very bottom can convince leadership to change their mind. At least that was it until recently. The guy you're seeing here, Akio Toyoda, is the CEO of Toyota Motor since 13 years. He actually just announced that he's stepping down and will become chairman of the board. But I'm not a big fan of his work because he seems to be more an American style of manager. Anybody who disagrees gets fired. And he completely restructured management and removed everybody who disagreed. He really tried to change the culture at Toyota, but for the worse, that only he is right and everybody else either agrees or is wrong. And he treats Toyota almost like his own kingdom. The Toyota family owns about 1% of the shares of Toyota Motor. It's a publicly owned company. You can buy stocks of it. But still, they have a very outsized influence, and that's how he became president of Toyota. And right now, it seems like he's trying to install his son as the next president, but it's not good for the culture of Toyota. And that makes me a little bit worried that Toyota may become worse. For example, he believes strongly that the future is not electric cars, but hydrogen-powered cars. So Toyota for a long time did not offer any fully electric cars. They were very good with hybrid cars. Prius and other sets, they're very good. But fully electric, they offered their first car only last year in 2022, only to have to recall it right away because the wheels fell off the car. And they've sold around 300 cars, so their market share is 0.04%. So I'm not happy with his leadership style, and I worry that he damaged the Toyota culture quite a lot. Actually, other companies in the Toyota group, like for example Denso, they try to avoid working with Toyota because they're worried that the bad culture at Toyota will affect Denso, and they don't want it. So it's an unfortunate development. But in more positive terms, one thing Toyota did different is what they call flexible assembly line. And that's a bit confusing because some people define flexible assembly line as making many different models on the same assembly line without big changeovers, which is also true. But in this context, they design it as a line which can be changed very easily. Here you see a model of a conventional assembly line. It has lots of overhead structure, it has permanently installed machines. And if you want to change the line, it is very difficult. And Toyota wants to, or already has changed in at least some plans to their lines to something much more flexible. So they removed all the overhead structure. It looks very surprising if you actually see it. And they try to put pretty much all equipment on wheels. So if necessary, you can just release the brakes, remove it, and change the line. So that's one of the things they did quite differently. And I have a few still pictures from a short video. That is the Toyota line. You see in the back, here comes the line, makes a U-turn and goes back on the other side. And they planned to make the line longer. And normally, that would be take a couple of days where you shut down the plant completely, like a week or so. But with the new flexible assembly line, so we're able to do it on one weekend. So that's the line at the beginning. Then they started to construct, make it longer. And at the end, the line looked like this. You see here the cars coming from one side, making a U-turn and going to the other side. And for example, the U-turn, you can see here this turning table, this gray beige structure, where the platform is just rotated 180 degrees to the other side to go back. And in old times, the turning table would have been a hole in the floor where everything is installed. But here, it's just put right on the ground. It's very mobile. You can almost carry it away on your own if you're strong enough. So it is a very mobile system, and it's easy to change. So that's one of the big new things at Toyota, besides changing CEO. But it seems the new CEO is a prodigy of the Akio Toyoda, so it doesn't look that he's going to change anything, which is unfortunate. Anyway, just a picture from the Tokyo Motor Show, where I also went, one of the Toyota models. And it was one of my first big car shows, and I thought the cars are the star of the show, but I was wrong. Apparently, the attendants, good-looking young female attendants, are the stars of the show. And I actually felt sorry for the girls, how they really were surrounded by all those photographers taking pictures of them. So for me, not really a nice picture, but it is Japan. So yeah, just wanted to show you that too. Anyway, Nissan, as I said earlier, also a very good company. And in terms of efficiency, actually even better than Toyota. And they had the two engines plants I visited in Yokohama and in Fukushima were actually on average more efficient than the average Toyota plant, despite being sub-assembly lines, engine plants. Normally, the main focus of manufacturing management is on the final assembly lines, the last step before you sell the product. But Nissan was already better in the sub-assembly lines. So very well organized plant, surprising how well it was organized. Lots of visualization, it's easy to understand, and very efficient plant. But there was one thing which stuck out to me. I visited many different plants, not only automotive, but also other plants. And Nissan felt very different. Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, Subaru, Mazda, Mitsubishi, they all felt like typical Japanese car plants. Nissan felt like a European plant with Japanese workers. But I always had the feeling I'm standing in a European plant. And it's hard to pin down why I had this feeling, but it felt very European. For example, at Toyota, if you need some structure, they try to make something that works, but they don't care how well it looks. So if you visit a Toyota plant, you may see some things just put together with duct tape, or of course not for the final product, but for the machines or so, to have some cheap pipe structure just bolted together. At Nissan, it was all with fancy aluminum profiles. Maybe you've heard of Bosch Rexroth profiles. It's very nice looking, but very expensive aluminum profiles. So it all looked much more sophisticated and more expensive. So that was one thing I definitely noticed at Nissan. And maybe it is because Nissan is indeed very strongly influenced by foreigners. It's probably the Japanese car company with the biggest foreign influence of any of the major Japanese car makers. The guy you see here on the left, William Gorham, was an American engineer, and he moved to Japan. And when Nissan started to produce car, he became an engineer at Nissan and became their chief engineer, and he had a very strong influence on how Nissan builds car. He brought with him all the knowledge about automotive building from America and brought that to Nissan. So he is still revered at Nissan as kind of, he's one of the big influences, one of the technical founding fathers of Nissan, if you so will. And he gave Nissan a very Western and very American feeling, because he pretty much brought all his knowledge from America, from American automotive industry, and gave that to Nissan. He later also became a Japanese citizen. He during the war, he renounced his American citizenship and became a Japanese citizen. So yes, very strong influence on Nissan. The person on the right, a bit more recent, Charles Ghosn, and he was up to recently the CEO of Nissan. He is from Lebanon. He is also the CEO of a French car maker, and he also had a strong influence on Nissan while being obviously not Japanese. Ended not so well for him, because the French car maker had a much higher share in Nissan than the other way around. So the Japanese government was worried that Nissan will be lost to the French. And they did some weird accusation of tax fraud and financial misdealings. They arrested him, forbade him from leaving the country. He was under house arrest, and whenever he was supposed to be released, they made up a new charge, something very weird. In the end, Ghosn hired a special team of ex-military guys, and they pretended to be a music band, visited him at home to make a concert, and smuggled him out in a suitcase where before was a music instrument. So he was able to get out of Japan. It's a very strange story. but what I wanted to say was he also was able to influence Nissan very much. So Nissan is much more of a European feeling company than an American company, than a Japanese company. And also, especially compared to Toyota, they're much higher automated. Nissan is a much bigger fan of robots. Toyota, of course, also uses robots, but they try to think, do we really need a robot, or is a human good enough, or even better? Yeah. I also visited Nissan Fukushima, and you may have heard Fukushima in the news from the earthquake, from the nuclear power plant. That's a picture shortly after the earthquake, and you see the floor has shifted. You see the fault line where it broke and kind of the floor was damaged. You see at the left this wardrobe, which is tilted. And they decided to repair the plant. But even now, if you go into the plant, you see kind of the floor. Then you have a slope. And then the floor continues like 10 centimeters higher because they didn't reduce the entire floor, but they just made a slope where they had this 10-centimeter gap. It's now a slope. Interesting. We don't have it in Germany because we don't have earthquakes, luckily. Yes. Another small, beautiful tea house in Japan. I love Japanese gardens. They're just beautiful. And that's one of their old tea houses, which I visited. The next company I would like to talk about is Mitsubishi. And I have it here listed as a Japanese company, but it is no longer Japanese. It was put into pieces and sold. The Mitsubishi Motor, the car maker, is now part of the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance, where Mitsubishi is the smallest partner of Renault and Nissan. You remember Charles Ghosn? He was the CEO of Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi. I think by now they've sold it again a little bit again, but yeah, so Mitsubishi Motor is no longer Japanese. And Mitsubishi Fuso, where they make their heavy trucks, is now part of Daimler. It's actually no longer called Mitsubishi Fuso, but called Daimler East Asia. And a lot of the Mitsubishi employees are very sad that the Mitsubishi diamonds, you see the logo with the 3 red diamonds, the diamonds of Mitsubishi are now in another jewelry box of foreign owners. So they're a little bit sad about this. Yeah, the guy on the left, he looks sad, but one thing I noticed was that at Mitsubishi, people seem to have more back pain than at other plants. I saw more people rubbing their shoulders and like doing this shoulder twisting from back pain. So I'm not sure if it's worse than other plants. It's just a very subjective observation, but I felt like they had more back pain. One other thing Mitsubishi does different, and I have not seen it anywhere else, is what they call their tatami conveyor. Tatami is a Japanese word for those rice straw mats. I've showed it in the picture on the right. The floor typically does not have carpet. Sometimes there's wood, but for comfortable living, they have these mats made out of rice straw, and they call it a tatami conveyor. Of course, not because they have rice straw mats on the conveyor line, but it was the only car maker which I've seen where they rotated the car completely. Like if you want to work at the front or back of the car, they rotate the car so you can easily get to the front of and the back. You don't have to walk in between. When they work the sides, they rotate it 90 degrees, and now you can get easy access to the sides and don't have to walk much. They do this to reduce walking distance. Almost all Japanese car makers put in a lot of effort to reduce walking distances and other non-value adding steps to make it very efficient and fast. And that's one of those examples I've seen only at Mitsubishi, where they really rotate the entire car on the assembly line. So it's easier for the worker to go there, it's easier for the worker to assemble. Or another example I found at Mitsubishi is their automated guided vehicles, AGVs. I'm sure you've heard of them, maybe you've seen of them, that many plants in the Western world have those little mobile robots which transport material. And one of those mobile robots, it usually costs around 50,000 euros or so. It's not cheap. Mitsubishi found a very low-cost solution for this. And in one plant I saw this, a nearby golf course went bankrupt. And Mitsubishi bought for very little money those golf carts, those electric carts where you drive around on a golf course. And they modified it, they added a computer and made this golf course cart to a self-driving vehicle. You see it on the left, they kept the seats, they kept the lights, they added some lights on top, they added something to pull it, and those vehicles were pulling the material on little carts, on little shelves with wheels through the plant. Total cost of one golf cart with modifications around 1,000 to 2,000 euros. Much cheaper than the 50,000 euros for a full-fledged AGV. So good way to save money, especially since you have hundreds of them. And 100 times 50,000 versus 100 times 2,000, it is a difference in money. I've seen almost the same also at Toyota, except at Toyota they also removed the seat and the steering wheel and only the base was left, whereas at Mitsubishi they kept the seats and steering wheel. So if there's any problem, an employee can just jump in and take control and drive it manually again. But normally it's working in automatic mode. So that was very interesting to see. Very interesting thing at Mitsubishi. Another picture from Japan, that's one of the major department stores in Ginza, where a famous artist had this exhibition, and I just thought it looked very cool with all those red dots, white pumpkin thingies. So you sometimes find really amazing stuff in Japan if you just look around. So it's one more car brand I would like to talk about, and that is Mazda. It is one of the smaller ones. Mazda makes only about 1 million cars per year, much less. The biggest one is Toyota with 10 million cars per year. And Toyota is, depending on how you count, it's the biggest or second biggest car maker in the world. And Mazda with 1 million cars is one of the smaller ones. And in industry, you say 1 million car is kind of the limit. Below that, it's really hard to make money with cars. If you have a car company making less than 1 million cars, it is difficult to make money. Exceptions, of course, companies like Ferrari and Lamborghini, which make much less, but still make even more money. They're highly profitable. And Mazda was also a well-organized plant, well visualized, but it did not have much digital display boards, the so-called Andon boards, which were common in pretty much all the other plants. Good ergonomics, for example, in the lower right, but sometimes they have to walk to the other side. Kind of, if you have workers, sometimes they have to switch from one side to the car to the other side of the car. So it is a lot of walking, and they try to put some material on the right side, but it's still a bit more walking than Toyota and other places. So you lose efficiency by walking back and forth, which Mitsubishi, if you remember, tried to avoid with the tatami conveyor belt, where the entire car rotates 90 degrees. Mazda is also famous for its different type of engine, which they made for a long time. For a long time, they made those Wankel engines. You see an animation in the upper right. It's not the typical piston engine, which you probably have all in your cars, but for a long time, Mazda was pretty much the only major car maker who used those Wankel engines, which had a completely different style of how burning gasoline powers your car. I think they no longer make them, but for a long time, that's what they did. Also good efficiency and close to Toyota. But it is a surprise that Mazda still exists, because around 30 years ago, they made a big mistake, a really big mistake. If you want to make a textbook example of how not to do it, that was Mazda 30 years ago. And basically, again, it's a small car company, 1 million cars, but they decided we have many, many different brands. Not only models, not only different car models, but different car brands. And besides Mazda, they started a brand called Automotive, still part of Mazda, but a separate brand. It's like Toyota and Lexus. It's the same company, but you can buy a Toyota and you can buy a Lexus, different brands. And for each brand, you have different models. And here, they started the Automotive in 1990, and they wanted to make 8 new models for Automotive. They also wanted to start another brand, Unos. They actually did it. They started to produce 9 new models for the Unos brand. Then also around 1990, the Anfini brand, 5 new models for the Anfini brand. Another brand, M2, had 3 new models in 1991. And they also thought about a luxury brand, which they wanted to call Amati, where they wanted to have 2 luxury models, which luckily they canceled. And all of that on top of what they already had with the brand of Mazda and the models under the Mazda brand. So it's like over 20 new cars, over 20 new car models within like 5 years. And for a small company, which makes very few cars to begin with. As a result, the development department just collapsed. It was just too much. They couldn't handle it. They had too many different tasks. They had like 20 new car models to develop in a very short time. And that would be difficult even for large companies like Toyota and Volkswagen, which occasionally make new car models, but usually they just refine what they already have, but not develop 20 new models in like less than 5 years. That's insane. That's crazy. As a result, Mazda almost collapsed. They had huge financial troubles. The bank was hesitant about giving them even more money, and this bad decision almost killed the company. But they've learned from that. And now, because of this really, really painful experience, they now are completely in the other direction. And they have what's called a SkyActiv global platform. A platform is trying to make one base model, one base system, and then just adjust a little bit. Like for different models, you have the same platform, but you make the wheelbase longer or shorter, or you make it a little bit wider or smaller, but you try to keep everything else the same as much as possible. And at Mazda, this platform is called SkyActiv. And all models at Mazda use this SkyActiv platform. So if you would look at the metal underneath, it would look very, very similar for all Mazda car models, because it is pretty much the same design, just a little bit longer or shorter or that kind of stuff. And because in the 90s, they had this huge problem with too many different car models, they now are going the complete opposite direction. And in Japan, they're seen as a market leader in platform strategy. All other car companies try to learn from Mazda because Toyota, Nissan, and all others think Mazda does it the best. Mazda has the best approach for trying to make many different cars with the same technology, with the same underlying models, and especially with the sheet metal, it looks just like sheet metal, but if you change it, you need a new stamping tool, which costs a few million euros. So any changes to the sheet metal is very expensive, and the more sheet metal you can keep the same, the easier it is, the cheaper it is to make cars. So that's a platform strategy. Of course, they also use some modular strategies that within the same platform, they try to have the same modules, like the air condition is the same in all Mazda platforms. Same basically in most other cars, too, like Toyota and Volkswagen, they all try to use the same air condition within their entire line, or maybe with some small modification. But if you drive an Audi or a Golf or a Passat, it may have the same air condition system. It's just the buttons which are a little bit different. But Mazda in Japan is seen as a leader in this standardization, in this kind of platform strategy. I thought that was very interesting. So another picture from Japan, that's one of those really, really crazy cafes, kawaii monster cafes, the cute monster cafe. Unfortunately closed during the pandemic, but it's one of those places where it's just they get totally crazy with their design, and it's really, really strange but beautiful to visit. Yeah. Anyway, I visited over 50 different plants, including like 20 to 30 car plants out of all 7 Japanese makers. I visited all over Japan except the northern island of Hokkaido, and try to compare them. But from Kyushu in the south to Honshu and Fukushima in the north, I traveled all across the land to look at car companies, and it was very interesting. And the companies all had different strategies. They had different strengths and weaknesses. In terms of efficiency, Toyota and Nissan were best, but also many other things, from the tatami conveyor at Mitsubishi to the platform strategy at Mazda. Lots of very interesting approaches. Also, one thing which is special in Japan, let's compare it first with Europe. In Europe, it's quite common for an employee to leave one company and join another company. Like if you work for Volkswagen, at one point you may quit Volkswagen and may join Daimler or BMW, if it's a better job offer or if kind of some development. So in Europe and America, shifting between companies is very, very common. This is not so in Japan. In Japan, it is not always, but still very, very common that you get hired right after university and then stay with the very same company in different functions till you retire. So sometimes it's called the iron rice bowl. Once you are with a company, you stay with the company. It's very, very rare to get fired, also because it's legally difficult to fire somebody after a certain time. But usually there is very little exchange between companies. And because of that, knowledge from one company travels only slowly to another company. So what Toyota knows travels only slowly to Nissan, or from Nissan to Subaru or so. One exception is Suzuki. Didn't look at Suzuki in detail, but one exception is Suzuki, which is very close to the Toyota headquarters. And because Suzuki is also smaller, they use a lot of the same supplier of Toyota, and they have lots of exchange with Toyota. And also the Suzuki CEO, at the time when I was visited, when he was younger, he worked at a Toyota plant for a couple of years before he started at Suzuki. So Suzuki is one of the exceptions that they do have knowledge about Toyota and use this also to improve their plans. But overall, it was a very interesting time. I was very glad that my job as a professor allows me every 4 years to take 1 semester, 1.5 year of a break to do research. And I went to Japan, last year I also wanted to go to Japan again, but because of Corona, I went to Zurich for half a year, which was also very interesting. But next time I plan to go to Japan again and study more on the Japanese automotive industry. But overall, very exciting trip. And I hope all the stories I told you, all the little details about the different car companies were interesting to you. I could talk more for hours. I have like many more slides which I could talk about. And I could also talk a lot more about lean manufacturing, but we're running out of time for the presentation. So at this point, I would like to hand back to the moderator and invite you all to ask questions regarding to Japanese automotive, but also questions to lean or pretty much anything else which you are interested in. So please, fire away. And I look at the chat on the right to see if there are any questions in the chat, but yes.
And that, thank you for your time. We really enjoyed it. Dear Christoph, dear audience, we have come to the last part of the webinar, the question and answers part. If you want to ask something, you can write it. While you write, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When Ahmed met you and invited you to be a guest on the webinar, I met you in Tashan in Teslich, since you worked a little with the Boston industry on the Pete Audio Summit. Can you tell me what your experience was like? How much work should be done on improvements, since we have young people in the audience who can improve it?
How much work should be done on improvements? That's a good question, not an easy question. It depends on how big your problems are. You always should work on improvements, but if you have lots of problems, you need to improve quick and a lot. Otherwise, you may not exist as a company anymore in the future. If you have little problems, you still should become better, because by becoming better, you improve quality and reduce cost and get more customers, but it's no longer as urgent. So it depends a lot on how much problems you have. Toyota actually uses a lot of people for improvement because they really want to push the envelopes. They want to become as good as they can. And you would be, as a Western company, you would be really surprised how many people at Toyota focus on improving the shop floor and other processes. And in the Western world, it's often something which is an afterthought, or the people on the shop floor, you have kind of the supervisor in charge of 25 people. And on top of that, he is in charge of improvement too. But of course, he doesn't have time for improvement anymore because he has to manage 25 people, which is already a lot and hard to do. So in the Western world, often improvement is neglected. They plan to do it, but they don't give people the time needed to do it. And even if there is some time, kind of since the time is up and then it's done, and so it's not yet completed, but it doesn't matter. So they continue to the next one, and this half-finished improvement is often causing more problems since the improvement was supposed to solve. So it is difficult, but Toyota, to get to the efficiency of Toyota, you need a lot and consistent effort of improvement, also in the same direction. One example from another car maker, improvement was reduce cost. And I was working with the axles, where the wheel is attached. So to reduce cost, we took out expensive aluminum parts and added cheap steel parts. 5 years later, next project, we need to reduce weight so our cars becomes better and sportive. So what did we do? We removed the steel part, put an aluminum part. 5 years later, now we need to reduce cost again. So we removed the aluminum part and put in the steel part. So we're doing lots of things, but we're not moving forward. We're just moving in a circle. We switch from aluminum to steel if it must be cheap, and we switch from steel to aluminum if it must be lightweight. So it's not really an improvements, and that happens unfortunately a lot in Western industry, that a lot of action but not much result. Okay, I see another question in the chat. Can you tell us more similarities and differences between Japanese and European automotive industry? Great presentation, by the way. Thank you very much, anonymous attendee. Yes, difference between Japanese and European industry. The Japanese plants, with the exception of Nissan, looked much less beautified. A lot of the solutions were just welded together or screwed together, whatever they had, or put some plastics there and some duct tape. As long as it works, they don't care how it looks, as long as it works. Whereas in Western plants, it's very important that everything looks nice and proper and kind of proper German engineering. Yes, that kind of stuff. Also, other differences. In Japan, since an employee is usually for life, they put a lot of effort in training the employee, including rotating different positions. If you start as a typical Japanese employee at Toyota, the first 6 months you work at the assembly line. No matter if you're an engineer or, okay, maybe not the secretaries, but engineers or design or financing, the first 6 months you work at the assembly line. Because Toyota believes everybody needs to know the assembly line. And the assembly line is the most important part for the success of Toyota. So everybody needs to know how it works and how to deal with the assembly line. And that's uncommon in the Western world. In Japan, also after the assembly line, they rotate different positions. Like after the assembly lines, they may be in construction. Since they may change to finance, and by the time they go higher up in hierarchy, they know a lot of different areas and know how everything works together. In Europe, it's not the same. If you get hired, for example, you get hired as an engineer for designing and constructing cars. And then you will, as long as you're in the company, be an engineer. And you know there's something like production or logistics, but as an engineer, you never know how it works in detail. You only know all the problems which come across. So you come kind of, as a design engineer, you complain all the things other people do wrong without understanding the problems they're having. So it's a lot more my group and your group and kind of a bit hostility in between than in Japan. So very, very different. Okay, we have more questions.
I can read them. Thank you, Roser. Next question was from Rasim Duric. Is from Rasim Duric. Do French companies manufactures cars in Japan?
Yes, they do. For one thing, for example, Mitsubishi is now foreign owned. Actually, in terms of cars, it's not so much because Japan is a more expensive country, but they do make many car parts. And I've been, for example, to a truck plant owned by Daimler near Tokyo. So Bosch has many plants in Japan. And I don't know in particular any Western car-only plant, but I know a truck plant near Tokyo, which is owned by Daimler, and as far as I know, not part of the Mitsubishi group. All right, next question.
Next question comes from Anthony Hunter-Hatich. He asked, how would you rate Bugatti Rimac company comparing them with automotive companies from Japan in terms of manufacturing EVs?
That's a difficult question because I don't know very well the Bugatti Rimac. I know Bugatti as a luxury brand of Volkswagen, or did they just sell it? It was a Volkswagen at one point. Don't know really about the electric vehicles. I know that Toyota completely missed the electric vehicle brand because they thought it's all hydrogen or hybrid, electric hybrid, but they missed the electric brand. But I've heard that Nissan the Nissan Leaf is supposedly one of the good electric vehicles from Japan. So there are good vehicles from Japan. Lately, I think Tesla is the biggest producer of electric vehicle. He is the largest market share worldwide. But also China is starting to produce more and more electric vehicles because, except for the battery, an electric vehicle is actually quite easy to produce. A combustion engine car has about 3,000 moving parts. And with moving parts, I mean high precision moving parts with high tolerances. And that makes it expensive. An electric car has like 30 moving parts, so it's much cheaper to produce and much easier to produce. And I think China is warming up and will become a bigger producer. Yeah, but I don't know really about the Bugatti. I'm sorry. Okay.
Next question. From today's perspective, would it be profitable to produce multi-bank engines with VR6 head?
Okay, we clearly have a gearhead in here. Somebody was talking, I couldn't quite hear it.
From today's perspective, would it be profitable to produce multi-bank engines with VR6 head?
Yes, no, somebody in the background was talking, I couldn't hear that. But anyway,
I'm sorry.
VR6, if I understood it correctly, you mean like 6-cylinder. I hope I don't misunderstand. I'm not a car guy. I'm driving a 15-year-old Toyota, which is slowly dying because I don't really care much about cars. For me, a car is a car is a thing to get from A to B and not something to express myself and kind of identify myself with a car. So I'm not really a car guy. But I think the whole idea of combustion engine in the long run will vanish. Electric cars, the only problem with electric cars are still the batteries. They don't last very long, 200, 300 kilometers, and they take long to recharge. But it's getting better and better. And I think at one point, an electric battery will refill just as you refill a gas tank, like 10 minutes, and you can drive another 500 kilometers. And at that point, the whole idea of combustion engine is something which you no longer need. And electric cars I believe electric cars is the future. And as soon as we solve the battery problem, it will be pretty much all but electric cars. Almost everything will be electric cars, I mean. Not sure if I answered the question, but again, I'm not really that deep in engine design. Apologies.
Okay, thank you. The next question. Does South Korea produce more cars than Japan?
Does South Korea produce more cars than Japan? I don't have the actual numbers in my head, but South Korea has Hyundai and Kia, I believe, so 2 car makers. And I think Japan still produces more cars. Toyota is the biggest or second biggest, depending on when you measure it, car company with around 10 million cars, at least before Corona it went a little bit down during Corona. So I think overall, Japan produces more cars because it has a longer history of producing cars. It's also a bigger country in terms of Korea. But I've visited also Korean plants. I went to some Hyundai plants, and I liked them too. So the plants itself are also good, but in terms of quantity, I believe Japan is bigger, but that's something I would have to Google to get the exact numbers. And I think you skipped one question. How do you compare European car makers' efficiency versus Japanese? And with efficiency, I assume you mean how much value adds. Let me scroll back. That kind of efficiency. I visited some European car makers, and what I've seen is worse than in Japan. For example, I visited 1 or 2 Daimler plants, and I was around 40–50% efficiency. So kind of, yeah, okay-ish level for Japan. but I also visited a French plant and said, I didn't publish it because it was too embarrassing, but it had like a 30% efficiency. So I believe in average, Japanese car makers are more efficient, are better. And I think that's better European plants, German plants, European plants, have an efficiency about kind of the average or almost average Japanese plant. And of course, it makes a lot of difference in money, because if you need 50% more people to make the same car, it is more expensive. All right. I think we went through all the questions, and we're just out of time, if I see it correctly.
The last comment for tonight comes from Rasendur, who said, excellent presentation, thank you. And for the end, I will thank you all for your time. You can continue to follow the work of the Bosnia-Herzegovina Futures Foundation on social networks, and next month with a new topic in our series of webinars. I wish you a pleasant rest of the evening.
Also, one more thing, if you like to read more about this, you'll find a lot of those information also on my blog. Thank you.